It was a last minute suggestion. They wasn't given enough time to prepare. So a lot of the mass bands that you would expect on Monday or maybe on Tuesday were not being able to, in that short notice, been able to bring across that celebration, that festive that they normally do. But from I mean, most majority of the people said that it was like in a matter of a few days. But I know that in the previous weeks before, they had a meeting with artists, meeting with the carnival committee with certain gesture to how to bring across the carnival. But it wasn't come to terms as they expected. Based on the situation with the COVID-19 and the rise of the COVID-19, I think the decision was not accepted in how to bring it across. So it was bring across last minute that they were going to have carnival. But for the business area of it, a lot of the business persons were happy because with Grenadians and foreigners going up to Carriacou to have that festivity, of course, we had Slum bringing up the entire Jab Jab crew and a few of the Grenadian artists. There were a few promoters that had little shows here and there. But in terms of the pretty mass and stuff, that you barely see any of that. It was just more like street jam, like a blocko, you know? But the business segment, a lot of the hotels and guest houses were filled. A lot of the food places, of course, made a little money. You understand? But in terms of the promoters and producers and artists, it was very hard for them. Yes. But of course, we know that Carriacou, well, I must talk about the Shakespeare Mass, which was followed by, it's a traditional mass that no matter what, that was been held, of course, on Tuesday, mainly, where it's mainly men, but now we're seeing a lot of women are getting involved. And that mass is basically a traditional mass based on the story from Shakespeare, which was invented in 1599. So that mass, of course, was continued to be celebrated, of course. And we had the Jab Jab, we had a few of the, they only had one mass band on Monday, which was a Monday night mass. But I mean, it was mainly spectators. There were not much people involved based on the last minute,
So in terms of quality, it fell short on quality.
Fell short
but not on participation.
That's right. Because of course, you need preparation and it takes time.
Yeah.
You can't just, come up with a band. It takes money, it takes time, it takes quality in preparing everything. So that affected in that sector of it. I think a lot of people were saying that it's a bit unfair, but we have to look at it in a formality of that we were all going through a pandemic. This is not just you wake up and you say, look, we're going to have carnival. Because even now with Grenada Carnival, even though we heard that we are going to have carnival, I think it's still on a standstill watching to see what is going to happen. And things might be different here because of the time and the situation. If you notice, a lot of the protocols has been dropped. You don't have to sign up your names and leave your number anymore. People still wear masks and sanitize their hands. But the socializing and all that, they ease up a bit on it.
Right.
So maybe things would look different. But still, the mass bands are saying that they're still waiting on the carnival committee to give them the rules in how they are going to run the carnival. So I think it's not just them. They are waiting, of course, on the head, which is the leaders, to state whether or not things are going to be back to normal, in the regular way that we would have it.
As a Caribbean region, and by extension, all of the sub-regional islands, we are net importers of food. That's one. And that's one of our vulnerability when it comes to food security. And being net importers, it therefore means that we are easily affected by external shocks. And one external shocks being that of the impact of war. Second thing in terms of our vulnerability is that, as you just alluded to, we are now We are actually currently in a pandemic, and we are still feeling the effects of the negative impact food security from the pandemic in terms of loss of jobs, closure of our borders, and so in terms of importation of foods. The third thing is that in terms of our vulnerabilities, our dependency on energy, on fuel. And that's another thing that would directly impact our level of food security. And I can go into details probably later on as to, how fuel, I'm sure many persons would know the direct impact of increased oil prices on our food supply. And then fourthly, we basically have to speak about our input supplies and where we get most of our input supplies from in terms of production, for crop production. Most of our fertilizer, and so Russia, Ukraine, quite a significant percentage of the input supplies come from this part of the region. So just looking at it from that, you can see that all of the pillars of food security would be directly affected. So we're talking about food availability, food access, even food utilization and food sustainability would in some way be severely affected. Mia Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, she would have alluded to that, and she would have spoken to, having some safety nets currently. The question then is, how long will these safety nets last? Considering what is going on now with Ukraine and Russia, it's fluid in that we don't know how long this war is going to last, and we don't know how long our current safety will be as it relates to food security. So from judging from those vulnerabilities as a region, I would definitely say that we would be directly impacted by what is happening with Russia and Ukraine.
Big countries especially plan in terms of decades and centuries. We in these smaller societies plan in terms of days, weeks, and months, and to some extent years. So in the realignment of what's happening, the United States will be quite prepared. If the United States thinks they have to send a delegation to Iran or North Korea or wherever, they would send that delegation because in their long-term strategic interests, they are prepared to use their heft, whether it's economic or political heft or military heft, to do what they want to do to achieve what they want to achieve. In this world, there's narrative and counter-narrative. And if you look at the major media, the same major media that had embedded journalists in American invading force in Afghanistan and Iraq are now cheerleading what the Americans call the Russian, and properly call, I think, the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. So the kind of condemnation we are seeing in the media now for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it is not the same kind of condemnation we saw for the American invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, of Iraq, of the NATO assault on Libya, and the assassination of President Gaddafi. So clearly, they are prepared to do whatever they need to do. Because if you take this contextually, and there was a very good piece in the newspaper, I think in New York Times, the Washington Post yesterday or the day before, by Henry Kissinger, former celebrated Secretary of State of the United States. And he talked about the historical connection between the Ukraine and Russia, going all the way back to the 15th, 16th century. And for a hawk like Kissinger, I think Kissinger is strategic, however, in his thinking, and has said, whereas Putin and the Russian leadership need to allow for all levels of economic cooperation with the Ukraine from Western societies, Kissinger was of the view that, look, because of that close connection, you have to understand and allow for Russian sensibilities.
Thank you very much. I mean, we must re-emphasize that we must support the United Nations Charter. We must support self-determination and the principle of non-interference in the affairs of sovereign nations. We must continue to lend the air and to give support against the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, against innocent men, women, and children. But if nothing else, this Ukrainian crisis should bring, we should allow it to bring an awareness of other crises in the world, not least the Palestinian question, not least the question in Syria and Libya and Yemen and Ethiopia and Cuba and Venezuela, us here in the region. In other words, the hypocrisy and the double standards in terms of policy by the United States and Western powers. And at the same time, it ought to alert us of the need to strengthen Carriacou community. Dr. Barry spoke with regards to the need for increased interregional trade. And I would add for us to continue or to do better to be our brother's keeper here in the Caribbean region. Because as we notice, as the big powers, they fight their struggles, their geopolitical wars. And we are merely small fishes in the pond. And we have, consequential damage, really. Nobody, the Jamaican students certainly was not only foremost in the minds of the president of the US and the leaders of the Western European countries. The Jamaican students were not. We had to, and the Jamaican leadership and government had to battle with that own struggle. So it speaks volume with regards to us being our own brother's keeper. And I would ask and urge listeners and viewers going forward in this Ukrainian crisis that we keep an open mind and to